Thanks, Val. And as Val just mentioned, yesterday's session was an excellent way to kind of continue on this conversation. We heard a lot from leaders in terms of what are some of the elements that are impacting the cybersecurity posture of the healthcare sector, and that included rapid advancements in technology, obviously world events, and then budget constraints, resource constraints. So this session, we're going to approach it from a different vantage point. We're going to look at it from an academic, from research and development, workforce development. We're going to look at it from a legislative and mergers and acquisitions perspective. We're also going to look at it from the raw data of the impact of cybercrime from the lens of the FBI. We are honored to have such an astute and well-respected panel for this session. Maura Grossman, who's research professor with the David Sheridan School of Computer Science at University of Waterloo. Maura is also a practicing lawyer and has a clinical background as well as a clinical psychologist. We have Mr. Brian Levine, who is very well known in the CFF world. Brian is the managing director of cybersecurity and data privacy with EY out of Washington. He's also a former prosecutor with the U.S. Department of Justice. We have Mr. Michael Saylor, who is CEO of Blackswan Cybersecurity, a cybersecurity solutions firm out of the Texas area. He's also a professor with UTSA in San Antonio and is currently doing his doctorate in cybersecurity. And rounding out is Mr. Ryan Weydeck, who is actually a senior investigator with the FBI Cybercrimes unit out of Dallas. So I thought we would get right into the topic. And Maura, one of the topics that was very well discussed from the pros and cons was the innovation around AI and the use of AI. Thought maybe you could start off by telling our viewers about some of the work that you've been doing and what you and your team are seeing in terms of impact in the healthcare sector.
Thank you, Katherine, for having me. So I'm going to make a few remarks about synthetic health data as a potential enabler of security and trust. So as you said, there's been much discussion lately about AI as sort of the solution to all of our problems, as well as potentially the end of civilization as we know it. And as usual, the truth is somewhere in the middle. AI is a tool, like fire or a hammer. It can be used to do great things. It can be used to do evil and tremendous harm, depending on what we choose to do with it and the guardrails that we put around it. So I do think that synthetic health data presents us with a great opportunity because we're really starting in an area with a clean slate. There are very few guidelines, virtually no existing data governance frameworks or structures. So we have a chance to get things right and to enable security and trust with this very new technology. So what do I mean by synthetic health data? Let me set the stage a little bit. So everybody talks about the huge value of data these days. They call it the new oil because it fuels all the amazing AI applications that we've seen the last few years, if not just the last few months. But it's extremely challenging for researchers to obtain data. We're constrained by certain ethical and data security, data protection requirements. And it's equally challenging for commercial enterprises that typically collect, purchase, or sell such data, usually with some negative repercussions for their reputation. Think about Facebook, and it just got a huge fine from the EU. And think about ChatGPT in Italy, where it was banned. So there are real challenges, but of all the data that's out there, health data is probably the hardest to come by because of the extreme sensitivity and the many rules and regulations that surround PII. But what if we can easily generate a set of health data that contains characteristics that are very, very similar to real data, but that's not traceable to any particular person. And you could use that synthetic data for teaching, for research, for product development. And that's what synthetic health data is. It's fake data that preserves the same overall statistical properties as a real data set. So it looks, feels, and behaves very much like real data, but there's no one-to-one correspondence between any data point in the synthetic set and the data from which it was generated. So such data would allow you to do many of the same things with synthetic data you could do with real data, minus many of the same privacy and security risks. So what are some of the potential use cases for synthetic health data? Well, use cases run on a continuum from local to global, and from purely academic or public health uses all the way to purely commercial. So let's look at a few points along this spectrum. So a local public health oriented use might be your neighborhood hospital that wants to study the quality of the healthcare it's providing in the community in order to improve it. A more provincial or federal approach would be to do the same thing, but for an entire healthcare system, either for, say, all of Ontario or for all of Canada. A more global public health oriented approach would be to look at, say, nutritional and maternity practices all over the world to observe trends and to make recommendations to improve global maternal health care. A local academic use might be an individual instructor in the School of Public Health at Waterloo who wants to teach her students about statistical methods in epidemiology, or a small research team in the epidemiology department in a medical school. They're studying prevention strategies for a particular disease, and they can work with a synthetic data set. A global academic use, a whole series of university-based research teams all around the world working together to track a global pandemic, to prepare systematic review research proposing evidence-based preventive and treatment. And finally, commercial uses might be a small startup that's developing a mental health app to treat patients in rural areas who are unable to access psychological, psychiatric help, or a big pharmaceutical company that's seeking to develop new medications. And these different use cases both inform practice and lead to the development of new and innovative healthcare products and services, but they also raise very different issues implicating privacy and trust, and may elicit very different responses from the population. So patients may be perfectly willing to allow the use of their data for some of these uses. For example, if they perceive it's for their own benefit or for social good or public good, but they may have very negative reactions when the same data is being used for purely commercial purposes to benefit big tech. So a lot can hinge on communication, transparency, and expectations about use. So when we think about trustworthiness or security and trustworthiness, if we look at the existing guidelines that involve trust and trustworthiness, for example, the US National Institute of Standards and Technology recently put out a risk management framework. They typically include the same 5, 6, 7 characteristics. Obviously, we want validity and reliability. We want safety or security and resilience to breach or malevolent attacks. We want explainability and interpretability. We want transparency and accountability. We want the tools to be privacy enhancing, or at least privacy protecting, and non-discriminatory and fair. So what are the potential opportunities and challenges with this synthetic health data, particularly in Canada? Well, right now, synthetic health data, it's the Wild West. There's no agreed upon data governance framework for the collection and use of this kind of data in North America. So regulations like HIPAA in the US and PIPEDA in Canada simply don't contemplate or address anything like synthetic health data. Right now, consent typically is not required from the original patient when the data is going to be used for quality control or quality assurance purposes, but it's really far less clear when we move into research and development whether it's still okay to use that data without consent. And there can be a really fine line between QC, QA, and research and development. It's also unclear whether review by an institutional or an ethics review board is necessary when a researcher is using synthetic data, since it's clearly not research involving a human subject anymore. But that's not to say that harm still can't be done to various groups if this isn't done right. So given this scenario, I think we have the opportunity in Canada to make sure that synthetic health data is developed in a secure and trustworthy way, and that it's not used in ways that harm data subjects, even if they're not personally identified. For example, we don't want to perpetuate bias or violate data sovereignty principles by using data improperly from Indigenous populations. So if we take into account these kinds of trustworthiness factors that I mentioned, we have to ask ourselves hard questions like, how representative is our original data? And does our synthetic data reflect more or less bias? Or how different does the synthetic data set have to be from the real data set, from where it came, in order to ensure privacy? And because there's a trade-off. The closer the data set, the synthetic data set is to the original data set, the better the accuracy is going to be, but the higher is the risk of re-identifiability. So we have to find that sweet spot that satisfies both groups. But these are empirical questions, and empirical questions often have answers in science. So I believe that with multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, open dialogue, and transparency, it will be possible to find that sweet spot where we can achieve acceptable compromise and the right balance between the validity and the accuracy and the privacy and security as we develop objective, empirically based standards controlling the use of this kind of information. So the bottom line is that synthetic health data is a promising new development, but it's still in its infancy with many unanswered questions concerning consent, permissible uses, trade-offs, protections, and so on. And we can and must get it right to ensure security and trust.
Maura, this is fascinating. And from the perspective of the healthcare leader in our session yesterday, the protection of data was a very robust conversation. Mike Towers from Takeda had some very strong concerns, especially as a leader who's got of an international organization and the protection of that data. But this really does open up some very interesting discussions for how healthcare can actually be, and the production of information in healthcare can actually be facilitated. Brian, from your perspective, because you and Maura both share not only an interest in cybersecurity, but a legal background, what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of healthcare impact?
Yeah, well, first I got to say, I love the idea of synthetic health data. When I go to my phone and I go to the Epic app associated with my hospital and I look at my weight in there, I really would rather see something synthetic than my actual weight. Blood pressure, test results, it would all be better to have a synthetic version that I was a little more happy with.
But wouldn't it be great if it said to you, Brian, your weight is at this percentile for the men of your age, et cetera, and wouldn't that be motivating for you to say, oh, okay, I weigh 3 pounds less or 3 pounds more, or I'm more fit or less fit than other people, and to have that information, that's usable information.
it would be great if the answer was good for me. If it was not, and because it's synthetic data, we can just ensure that the answer is good for me. And that when I go to the app, I have a great experience. And then I think if everyone's having this great experience based on synthetic data, healthcare prices will also probably go down because we won't actually have to examine the patient. We'll just give them the data they want. And maybe then people's stress levels will go down. And it'll improve our mortality in general. So I think Maura's onto something here. This is probably a good point. I think I'm going to end there because I think that's the most important thing from this seminar. But what I wanted to talk about was how cybersecurity and data privacy enters the healthcare arena when we're talking about mergers and acquisitions, because that's what I focus on at this point at EY at Ernst & Young. So naturally, that would be something I'd want to talk about while everybody's having a party behind me at this particular moment. But also because as we're seeing these economic shifts, companies and healthcare organizations in particular need to do things in order to deal with these seismic shifts in the economy. And so one of the ways they're handling that is by acquiring other entities, selling off small pieces of their business, doing carve-outs, and reorganizing. And that's all great. It's great for the healthcare organization. Sometimes it's great for the patients as well. We're talking healthcare and life sciences here. But there's a lot of risk associated with it. And I don't know that everybody's really thinking about the risk. When I talk to a lot of my healthcare clients, even some of the larger ones, they're kind of like, don't worry about that. It's we'll solve that at some point. And it, as a lawyer, as a cybersecurity guy, it kind of makes me nervous. Maura's point about synthetic data is important when we're talking about PII and PHI, protected health information, and the risk of losing that in the context of a breach is very high for a healthcare organization. So that has to be a focus. But there are other risks as well. There's, a lot of in the healthcare space, there's a lot of trade secrets out there, pre-patent and processes that are just never going to be patented, that could be lost, and that could have a big impact if China or another country out there has your secret sauce. You don't want that to happen. And then nowhere in the whole economy, I think, is the operational risk greater than in the healthcare space. Here, I mean things like ransomware attacks. I mean, it's one thing to attack Colonial Pipeline and people are running to fill a bag of gasoline in their car. But it's another thing if people are dying as a result of the fact that the hospital is not operational. And that has actually happened, at least the one report I heard from a hospital in Dusseldorf where they had a ransomware attack. This is in Germany, and they had to divert somebody in an ambulance to a different hospital, and they died on the way to the other hospital as a result of the ransomware attack. So it actually does happen. So you have all these risks in the healthcare space. At the same time, to Maura's point, we're seeing a greater regulatory burden there as well, as regulators are realizing they have, this is an important area for them to think about. HIPAA, of course, we all know about HIPAA. It's been around for years, but HHS and OCR within HHS are beginning to take it pretty seriously. I just posted on LinkedIn today. I messed up the post, so not everybody has seen it yet, but it's there about the FTC's healthcare breach rule, because this rule actually went into effect, I think, in 2009. It went into effect 14 years ago. And they only started using it in the last year, and they've used it twice already with significant fines to healthcare companies that are improperly allowing themselves to be breached by sending healthcare information to third parties without disclosing it to their own patients. So that's something one has to be looking out for. Link in with me if we're not already linked in. And then Washington State passed a law recently that raised the definition of PHI significantly. Now location information anywhere near a provider is potentially PHI, and there's a private right of action. So normal people like you or I could sue over this. So the regulatory risks are getting higher as well. And this is just in general, not in the transaction specific space, but as a result, in the transaction-specific space, the risks are just that much higher because there's two main risks in the transaction space. On one hand, we have counterparty risk, and that's the risk that the organization you're acquiring, if you're a hospital, maybe the other hospital that you're acquiring or merging with, or the healthcare IT company that you're acquiring, is either already breached, or already non-compliant with data privacy laws, and that's going to expose you, or security regulations, or that their program is so immature in either of the or both of those areas that it's only a matter of time before you are going to be impacted, and it's probably going to happen before you have an opportunity to fix the problem. That's the counterparty risk. But the other risk we're seeing now, and this is new during the COVID period, not sure why, but I guess the cyber criminals had a lot of time to rethink their strategy during the COVID period as they stayed at home instead of going to their normal day job at the Kremlin. And that is that as soon as these transactions are announced, these companies and healthcare organizations are getting hit pretty hard with ransomware attacks, both the acquirer and the acquiree, or if two companies are merging. And a lot of them are getting infected. The FBI issued a private sector notification on this recently, which is very rare. They're not normally just telling everyone, watch out for this. The Wall Street Journal did a report on it. Forbes did a report on it. So it's not just something I'm seeing here from EY, it's impacting people globally. So what I wanted to talk about briefly is how we can mitigate that risk. And the first thing is, of course, just being aware that it exists is important. But a couple of tips that I would give to help mitigate this risk. So first of all, if you're doing a transaction, regardless of what that transaction is like, separation, acquisition, merger, restructuring, especially if there's going to be an announcement, but regardless, bring in your CISO early into the discussion, as well as your data privacy person, so that they can start planning with you how to mitigate risks around this. I hear all too often that the CISO or the data privacy officer finds out about the transaction after it happened or as it's closing, and that's really, better late than never. But that it would be much more effective if they found out about it initially around this time the letter of intent is being signed, so they can help plan. Secondly, plan to conduct a robust cybersecurity and data privacy due diligence during the due diligence phase. Sure, there too, better late than never, but if you do it during the diligence phase, you have the most ability to deal with any of the findings. If you wait to find out till after the acquisition is over, you have no legal protections. You can't, you're not going to be able to do technical testing. You can't do planning properly to integrate in a safe and secure way. You're sort of at a disadvantage the whole time, and it can have a big economic impact on the transaction. So do it during the diligence phase. Ideally, work with a third-party, objective, independent expert to do this. In all the other areas of diligence, companies know to use a third party for finance, to use it for accounting, to use it for tax. It's not that organizations don't have finance, accounting, or tax department. They have these experts in-house, but they know the big value of doing diligence is getting a third party on the hook, but who can be objective, independent, who just does these transactions, to think about how significant is this here and how should we deal with it. And both the Delaware Chancery Court has said that recently, that it's really important to get a third-party advisor involved to avoid board and management liability. And the Department of Justice has said it recently in a memo they put out regarding corruption and different things like that, and weeding that out, particularly during the diligence phase. Next, if you have all these people involved, you have your CISO, you have your data privacy officer, you have a third party doing diligence, you often have a law firm involved as well. You want to make sure that there's good coordination between all of them and they're not all working in silos. Pretty important. And then I talked about this transaction risk. The attacks upon announcement. You want to take steps to mitigate that transaction risk. So as soon as you know the transaction is going forward, you want to start working with the target company to batten down the hatches for both organizations, to batten down the hatches, identify what is the low-hanging fruit and close that low-hanging fruit, deal with it, maybe do a compromise assessment to avoid certain issues before you do a public announcement and invite a lot of attacks on both organizations. And then the final point I want to make is, don't just think about cybersecurity and data privacy during the diligence phase. It's going to be really important during the entire transition phase as well. So during the integration or the separation phase, there's usually a transition services agreement. Both companies' security are tied together during that TSA period. So understand the risk before the integration. Build an operating model for the combined entity so you can figure out how you're going to do that in a safe and secure way. Watch out for some of the hot button issues during integration where problems happen. This is usually in the areas of identity and access management, IAM, as we say, and data privacy issues associated with moving data around, combining data without thinking about that in a thoughtful way, and incidents during the transition period, because what I find is companies are not ready for these and organizations are not ready for these incidents, and as soon as it happens during the transition period, nobody knows what to do, who has to be contacted, who has authority. Wait, we're in the middle of this transaction. Do we have to tell the acquirer? Does the acquirer decide? It's a merger of equals. Who's in charge? So we recommend doing transaction tabletop exercises as well before something happens to help work through these issues. So those are just a couple of ideas. Happy to continue the discussion on LinkedIn. So, feel free to ask questions here or on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic, Brian. And as always come out of any conversation with you a wee bit smarter.
Thank you.
One thing that you referenced, I want to turn this to Ryan, and this was a topic that was referenced quite a bit yesterday, was the topic of ransomware. Ryan, Denise Anderson, who's president of the Health ISAC, when she was doing kind of her opening remarks, talked about some of the impacts that have subsequently impacted the healthcare sector from a cybersecurity perspective. And she referenced the ransomware attack and subsequent paying of that ransomware with the Hollywood Presbyterian case back in 2016. She kind of noted that as being one of that takeoff points in terms of that's when they really started to see an acceleration and a targeted attack of the healthcare sector. It's just like cyber criminals realize that there's money to be made there. What are some of the other things that you and the team at FBI are seeing in terms of trends and impacts that are kind of targeting the healthcare sector?
Yeah, thanks, Katherine. And sorry for the late arrival here. Even we in FBI Cyber have computer problems. So there's one laying in the parking lot if anyone wants to go get it. Anyways, just wanted to talk about a couple of things specifically with regards to ransomware. For whatever reason, we in Dallas have become the recipients of so many ransomware cases. So we've really become subject matter experts within the Bureau, really within the U.S. government on how to best combat ransomware and what those investigations take. As Katherine alluded to, we certainly saw a huge uptick in ransomware probably around mid 2017. The bad actors started to realize that they could, they didn't have to encrypt home user PCs anymore. They would go after the corporate environments where the money was really to be made. And so once they started doing that, then they realized, hey, we're not encrypting people for $200 anymore. We're going to encrypt them for maybe $100,000. And then they realized that not only can we do that, but maybe we can also steal their data and try to leverage it for additional payment. And now it's very, very common for victims to be given ransom demands in the tens of millions. We've seen ransom payments of $50-60 million at this point. Healthcare is certainly a huge target because they have that sensitive information. You guys kind of sit at the epicenter of PHI, PFI, and PII, and so the bad guys know it's not valuable to them, but it's valuable to you, and so that's really a way for them to leverage that. The kind of the two things that I wanted to discuss mainly was was some general trends we're seeing in cyber attacks against healthcare targets, and then just what you can expect from an FBI interaction. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about what we do and how that engagement would look. So just want to kind of lightly touch on that. So first, our mission here in FBI Cyber is, they say, is to impose risk and consequences on our cyber adversaries through unique authorities, world-class capabilities, and enduring partnerships. And I really highlight the last part of that, meaning the enduring partnerships. We cannot do what we do here in FBI Cyber without our partnerships, whether that means with other government agencies or honestly more with private sector partners that give us information and we give them information. This is not a situation where we're going to come in there and take what you guys have. We want to try to help each other in doing this. Just some general trends, as we can see in like from 2022 stats of the reported healthcare incidents, about 70% of them are ransomware attacks, and then the next category would be data breaches. So we have seen the attackers, now they've realized that they can leverage that data for essentially ransom itself, is that a lot of these are just being categorized as data breaches. So it's old ransomware actors that are getting out of the ransomware game. All they're doing is they're getting in there, stealing the data and then auctioning it, or trying to ransom that data specifically. So there's no encryption event, but there definitely is data loss. And sometimes we've even seen where there's been a demand of a ransom after data has been breached with no encryption event, and then the victims refuse to communicate or refuse to pay, and then a ransomware incident is launched on top of that. So it just makes it even more complicated. And as you guys obviously know, and we understand this here at the FBI, is that really the conundrum that you guys run into is that you need to make this health data immediately available to everyone. But the problem is you have to also impose and ensure tight security against those who do not need it. So that's really the conundrum: is make it accessible, make it available, but not to everybody. And that is cybersecurity kind of in a nutshell. As far as ransomware goes, I know that we have mentioned the previous attack against the hospital in Dusseldorf. That is a case that we worked here in Dallas. It's a variant that we have here in Dallas. And just another layer on top of that was at that same hospital, there was another patient that died as a result of the attack. They didn't directly attribute it to the ransom attack, but I think it is. What happened is that a patient was in an access controlled room. What was described to me as like a glass sliding door, but it was access controlled. There was no physical key. This patient had a medical emergency, and they literally could not get the door open. The glass was bulletproof. She was already having medical issues to begin with, but they basically couldn't get in the door within a 15-minute time window to go provide aid to this person. They ended up passing away as a result of basically they couldn't get help to her. So it's those kind of weird things that we really wouldn't think of, that our access control to spaces is also controlled by our cybersecurity as well. And one of the things that we do here in FBI Cyber specifically is to coordinate with not only DHS, with CISA, with Health and Human Services, but also private sector, like I was discussing. We have these kind of engagements are really valuable to us, just to get the word out about that we're here and we're here to help. And so we definitely rely on you guys for a lot of that as well. There's a funny quote from Ronald Reagan that I like to throw in these situations, and it's in the slide of what to expect. And Ronald Reagan says the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." That always makes people go crazy, because they think that we're going to show up, take all their stuff offline. We're going to put hands on keyboard and we're going to get everything that's in your network. That is certainly not the way it works. We first of all, we don't want that data. We're responsible for it. We don't have the storage capabilities to take on all of the data that you guys have, as well as all the data that we have. So in a typical engagement, what we would be looking for is for the victim, whether it be a healthcare organization or whoever you guys are communicating with, is to simply call us. You can call your local field office, and ask to speak to somebody on cyber, especially if it's an active incident, you will get somebody on the phone, especially nowadays, to talk to you. And really what we're looking for is we're looking for basic information, especially at the start of an incident. We're looking for, when did the event start? What are you guys seeing so far? Has there been a demand of what the attackers want? If it's an insider threat, who do we think that insider is? Just so we can get started on understanding who that person might be. Doesn't mean that we're going to go arrest that person right away. It just means that we want to try to give you guys some pointers on what to do with that employee's machines or whatever they might have access to within the network. And then finally, what that ongoing relationship looks like. We understand that in the beginning stages of an incident that companies are not, they've got their own problems to worry about, and they don't need us breathing down their necks for all this information. And so that's why I like to send basically one email with about 3 or 4 points of, here's the main things that we're interested here in the first 24 or 48 hours, so that we can run our checks on our side to see if there's anything we can do to help. One of the things that ransomware attackers have been doing pretty consistently over the past couple of years is using exfiltration methods that we know, and that data is being sent through some kind of a file sharing process. I've seen FileZilla installed, I've seen Mega installed, Dropbox even. And if we're able to get that information quickly, we can go to those providers and seize control of those accounts. So then the actors, they may have a copy of it somewhere, but at least they don't have that copy. And maybe we can stop a data exfil and more spillage that way. And then finally, for those of you that don't know about it, the FBI does have a website to report cybercrime to. It's called ic3.gov. It's a pretty simple form. That in and of itself should, that mitigates, that's your reporting mechanism, first of all, to ensure that you guys have hit your compliance requirements. But also it's an easy way for you guys to send us information, and hopefully we get to it quickly. We do get, I would probably say, thousands of complaints a day through there. So if it depends, if you put very little information in there for us to review, it's going to be harder for us to parse that and get it to the correct office that needs to actually deal with that issue. So that is kind of a nutshell of what to expect from FBI Cyber. I'm happy to take any questions whenever.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Ryan. Mike, one of the things that, another one of the points that was talked about yesterday, and this was coming from the CISO perspective, and you have it kind of an interesting vantage point from not only working with CISOs with Blackswan, but also from, the academic and research side, was one of the things that was talked about was budgetary constraints, which is not a topic that's anything new. But one of the things that they talked about too was the demand and some of the constraints that the industry is facing in terms of finding skilled talent and developing that skilled talent. Maybe you can kind of share with our viewers some of the perspective you have from both the academic side of things and the research that you're doing with your doctorate, and then maybe, what are you seeing in terms of your day job?
Sure, and you're right. I do kind of see the different perspectives and the dynamics that kind of impact all of that. From a business perspective, especially in healthcare. You're not just looking for skilled cyber people, you're looking for skilled cyber people that have experience in healthcare. So how does cyber apply to all the equipment, the processes, the environments, the culture, the patient, all of those things. So experience is important. And then from a job seeker perspective, there's the whole, it's kind of like, I want to be a doctor. Well, what kind of doctor? Well, I'm not sure. Well, cyber is not too dissimilar. There's a lot of different disciplines in cyber. And if you don't have the opportunity to really get into that world and put your hands on stuff, it's hard to figure out what it is. A lot of people's passion starts with what they see on TV. I want to be a hacker or forensics. I want to do CSI stuff. And then, they take the training and put years into preparing for that type of job just to figure out or to find out that it doesn't really fit their work-life balance or their personality, or that work environment doesn't fit culturally or what have you. So, my dissertation is actually focused on, how do we, well, first identifying what that gap is, and then how do we go about looking for solutions there. And one of the problems is that disconnect between well, there's several, the employer needing resources and not having a standardized way of documenting that so that job seekers know what to expect. And then on the job seeker side, how do I align kind of my career path with the right education and the certifications? But in both cases, the gap is experience. So there's a misconception that there's not enough cyber people out there, and that's just not true. There's millions of cyber people out there. The gap is the experience part. So how do I hire somebody that I can trust, that can do the job? They went to school, they've got an undergraduate or even associates, maybe they've got a master's or even a PhD. They've got all the certifications, they've just never done the job. So how comfortable am I hiring that person, especially in a healthcare environment where people's lives want to be confident in that equipment and the security of the network. They want to make sure that door opens if they've got a problem and they need help from a doctor. They want to know that their data is safe. I think AI is a great example. There's a lot of really good university programs around AI and machine learning and all this good stuff. And people are graduating with degrees in that field, and maybe they want to go and work with Maura on new ideas or talk through that in some exercise. But then how do I, as a healthcare organization, feel comfortable hiring that person that has all this great education and all this innovative thought and perspective, but they've never really had the opportunity to apply it in a healthcare environment? And so I think internships and apprenticeships, we do that in a lot of other fields. Being in some of the other trades, you've got journeymen and apprentices, but we don't really enforce that in the cyber careers. And I think that's critical, not only for making sure that people are going into the right careers and investing time and money in a more efficient way, effective way, but also from an industry perspective, giving students in a learning environment exposure to those systems and processes and technologies that I would want to feel confident they've had exposure to in order to apply their skills and training. And there's tons of opportunities like that in healthcare. A lot of universities have campuses close to hospitals, and they let doctors and other disciplines do this. They go to school on those campuses and they interact with healthcare at the hospital in some degree. I think there needs to be some cross-functional programs where cyber and technology programs are introduced to healthcare while people are going to school, to give them that exposure and maybe even some experience before they graduate.
So, Mike, from your perspective, and again, as as an educator and also as an entrepreneur, and this, like I said, this topic of how do you develop that workforce, is that an opportunity for our industry to better support the healthcare industry in terms of providing those collaborative opportunities to get that skills and training so that they can get Val, you made the point yesterday about, the meaty part of the curve being that one who's got a little bit, the practitioner, there seems to be the gap there. And we heard that quite a bit. There's opportunities for entry-level roles within healthcare and a cyber role. And there's certainly a lot of accomplished leaders, but where they're seeing the gap right now is in that middle part, right? Where you might have a person who has some technical training and skills, but with maybe and transferable skills, but with some cybersecurity training, could make that kind of that leap over into cyber in the healthcare sector, but there's programs that aren't there. We're not seeing those. Are you seeing any of, do you see an opportunity for that in terms of academia and our industry being able to support the sector that way and providing those opportunities?
Absolutely, and I think it's not just healthcare. I think it's applicable to just about any industry. But I think healthcare particularly already has programs that are integrated with university institutions or even trade institutions where there's already a formal program or process for integrating students with the operational staff and technologies in healthcare. And so just making that available to the technical and cyber programs, I think, is the next step. And I don't think it would be much effort to develop that.
I'll just add, I think Mike's point that it's really hard to determine, just based on education and certifications and things like that, who actually has talent in this space is a really good one. I think, I'd like to offer a proxy for it because you're never going to really know. But in my experience, if they have a beard like Mike's, that's like at least that fulsome, or sometimes even much more fulsome, and they're bald like Mike, especially if it's a woman, they're probably going to be pretty good at cybersecurity. That's my experience. You should probably look at some other factors. But I'm looking at Mike right now, and I would hire him instantly. So just something to consider.
One of the other challenges is that these kids come into school and their ideal of the job they want when they come out is, and you could fill in the blank with, Facebook, Meta, Twitter, any of these big companies. Now it's OpenAI, of course, in Silicon Valley, and they're not really exposed to other options that might be of longer term or deeper or more socially impactful kinds of positions. And we have to think of a way to make these jobs more interesting than the picture of going to Silicon Valley and getting free food, and amounts of money. It's hard to compete with that. It's hard for anything to compete with that. So they don't even think of, health and cyber as, it doesn't even come up, but really as an option most of the time. And how can we get that information, out to students who are coming up who are very, very talented, that they don't have to go that sort of traditional route that their whole lives they've been groomed that's the end goal.
So I wanted to close out by giving everyone, all of our panelists, an opportunity to maybe share some final thoughts. One of the things that we did with the healthcare leaders yesterday and closing it out was kind of a call to action, their message out to our industry about what opportunities there are, what challenges there are. If you, from your vantage point, could speak directly to healthcare leaders, what would you like to tell them about in terms of the ways to engage? And we'll start, Ryan, we'll start with you, because obviously from an FBI perspective, and as you talked about, there's a real dedication and an interest to get involved in with the sector and to be a part of that. What would you like to say to healthcare leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that our, our assistant director of cyber within the FBI tells us over and over his favorite phrase is, we want to give victims the Ritz-Carlton experience. And I think in the past, maybe we've given maybe Best Western or somewhere in there kind of service, but we really are trying to get to the point where we provide that top level service to victims. And this is about partnerships, and we can't do what we do without engaging with you guys. And it's critical for us to move our mission forward to help protect American industry and infrastructure to do that. So I think it's just, we got to start having more conversations like this to build that trust, so we can have more conversations like this.
Excellent. Mike?
I have a lot to say. First, kudos to the Dallas FBI cyber team. I've worked with them for 15 plus years on incident response cases, and they may not be able to help everybody, but the data they collect on a particular breach or attack helps the next victim. And there's a lot of collaboration and value in involving them. And sometimes they just have good advice, and sometimes it just feels good that they're involved. So there's that. And then I'll say, community. Addressing the cyber workforce problem is a community problem. We have to support and mentor the next generation of cyber people. There's some really smart. I'll pick on AI some more. Super smart people working on AI, but if we don't educate them on the responsible use of AI and how it's integrated into technologies, especially in healthcare, then we're just introducing more risk. Even if it's beneficial to healthcare, it may also be beneficial to attackers. And so, similar to engineering other things that make our lives easier, we also have to take into consideration the risks that they present and opportunities for bad guys. But community is important. We've got to give students and those that want to get into cyber the opportunity to get hands-on and experience, to really flesh out what they want to do, but also demonstrate their ability to apply what they've learned and their skills. And some of that is also soft skills, communication, leadership, all those good things. They're not going to learn those unless you put them in that environment. And then lastly, definitely whenever you integrate new technologies, you've got to do an assessment of what risks and vulnerabilities and that introduces. Anytime you add something new to an environment, the baseline changes, the behavior changes, the people and the skills and all that stuff changes. You've got to constantly assess all of that every day. It's not a point in time deal. It's every day.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Maura?
I agree with a lot of what, if not everything Mike said. I think one thing I would add to that is we've got to get out of our disciplinary silos. That's so much of the issue. We're moving into a world where the issues and the challenges are so complex and so multidisciplinary, it's almost impossible for any one person to be able to solve all of the challenges. Exactly, for some of the points Mike made, is nobody has the deep background in all of these areas to be able to come up with the right solutions. So we got to get people out of their silos and working in very multidisciplinary ways. And certainly that begins in university. And it can't just be, I take my little cyber major or my little health major, and if I'm in my health major, I don't learn anything about statistics or AI or security. And if I'm in my cyber world, I don't have to learn anything about health because, what does that have to do with anything? And we have to move away from this thinking and really start to think more in an interdisciplinary way.
Amen to that. Mr. Levine, final thoughts?
Yes, well, I agree with everything that's been said, and maybe just to put a finer or perhaps less fine point on it, I think cybersecurity, especially in healthcare, is a team sport, and you need all of the types of people we have on this call and that we've been talking about to really play it effectively. So your deep technologists, your lawyers, your independent objective consultants, your FBI and other government representatives. They really all have something to add to solving these problems. But just saying that, and just saying we need more interdisciplinary people, which I totally agree with, isn't necessarily gonna make it happen. What I think is helpful is working the fact that you need all these different viewpoints into your plans. So when you're building your processes, whether it's incident response or product or building new products or marketing processes, make sure you're including this interdisciplinary panel of people who can think about the cyber and data privacy implications of what you're doing, ideally by design before you sink a lot of money into it, rather than at the back end. And I know everybody on this call is really happy to help you and support you in that effort.
That's excellent. Folks, on behalf of CFF, I want to thank you again for not only lending your time, but lending your expertise to this. Session was very rich in terms of information and new ways of approaching some of these issues. So on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.